I have a couple of announcements that just came into my brain. We will be sending you a survey after the conference sometime when people get their act together to send it out via email. It would be great if you filled it out, told us what you thought, and also suggest speakers, because we're always looking for speakers that will increase our knowledge and sort of make us think outside the box. And with that, I will turn the microphone over to Dr. Pajor, who will be talking about future drivers for improving farm animal welfare.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. Hope everybody had a good lunch. Everybody have a good lunch? Everybody's good? I hope not too good, because you'll be sleeping in about half an hour as I think it's kick in. So, the talk I'm going to give this afternoon is about kind of 20,000 foot level, kind of looking down the pike, thinking about what's coming in terms of animal welfare. And I think the take-home message is that animal welfare is here to stay. It's not a hiccup in time. Concern about animals, regardless of whatever industry or group you're working with. Animal welfare is part of doing business. It's part of companion animal, lab animal, farm animal. And it's called Future Drivers, but as I was looking over the slides the other night, I thought, oh, maybe a lot of this has already happened, so maybe it's not too far in the future, but maybe it's just letting you know as to some of the things that are happening in the world in terms of animal welfare issues. I'll talk about a lot of different aspects that I think are impacting animal welfare and changes that are occurring that are going to continue making animal welfare an important issue for veterinarians and for the different industries. I'll touch on a lot of these issues, and in the time I have, I won't go into a lot of depth on anyone in particular. It's more of that snapshot view. The first thing is to look at the attitudes of people around the use of animals for whatever purposes. And when we talk about that, we have to understand that we're talking about the attitudes when it comes to understanding the public, understanding the producer, and understanding the consumer. Okay? Consumers are important because they buy the products. Understanding the producer is incredibly important when it comes to getting information across and getting programs to be adopted by them. Understanding the public, it's broader than the consumers. There are those people who are critics as well as those people who are advocates. One of the interesting recent results released by Gallup in May of 2015 is this US survey that was done that shows the response to the question about, do animals have the same rights as people? Do they require some protection, or they don't need much protection under the law? The interesting component is the middle dark green line, which has risen from 25% to 32%, where people are responding saying animals have the same rights as people. That's a 7% increase. That's a big deal for that type of question. This isn't some sort of activist poll. This is a Gallup poll. It's a legitimate organization. What this is signaling is that concern about animals is increasing. Awareness around animal use is increasing. The general issue around protecting animals is also increasing. This isn't a unique phenomenon to the United States. In fact, similar types of surveys in different parts of the world have shown this increasing awareness or concern about how animals are treated regardless of what purpose we use those animals for. For example, when we looked at Canadian consumer attitudes, this is out of the UBC lab, Jeff Spooner was a PhD student there, we found that the Canadians responded with a strong preference for natural environments. They were in opposition to a single focus on animal health at the expense of natural living. That should cause some concern to the veterinarians, because what they're saying is, okay, so moving animals inside, I get the argument. You put an animal in a gestation stall or inside a cage or inside a building. You can control what they eat. You can control what they drink. You can give them a nice, healthy environment to live in without much stress. You can evaluate their health much more easier than if they're out on a pasture someplace. But if the trade-off is with something like the ability to perform natural behaviors and live their lives as an animal would want to live its life, do the things that it's been bred to do, they have a problem with that. Right? They had support for humane handling. They had a preference for that small family farm that Temple mentioned about before, this two issues around large farms and small farms. They have a clear opposition to confinement. And when I actually talked to a number of groups and a number of different surveys that have been involved with, especially with students, confinement is a huge issue. Right? It's part of that bias we have in terms of we don't want to be confined and we don't think animals should be confined. Animals that are confined are in some place not being treated appropriately in lots of cases. And they had a strong objection to animal suffering and pain associated with modern production methods. And I'm going to be coming back to the issue of pain a fair bit throughout the lecture, because I think it is the biggest issue involving social pressures on treating animals appropriately. I think pain is something everybody understands. We've all been part of the discussion around things like, or heard the discussion around things like gestation stalls and battery cages, and you've seen the movement that's occurring in the industry, pressure by retailers and others, to get away from those types of housing systems or husbandry practices. How many people actually understand what a gestation stall is? Right? Okay, how many people believe the public understands what gestation stalls are? Nobody believes that they know what they are. Do they know what battery cages are? Probably not really very much as well. But think about all the pressure to change those. Now, take something like pain. Most everybody understands pain, right? Everybody's had a headache. Everybody's taken an aspirin. And you're telling me that you're castrating animals without any type of pain management at all? And wait a minute. I can get it for my dog, but I can't get it for my pig? What's going on? Right? That's going to be an easy one. If you want activists to rally around another topic, that's an easy one to rally the troops around. Why? Because people understand it. And it seems wrong to cause animals pain without treating them. We actually looked at, when Spooner looked at the Canadian consumer attitudes in a little more detail, looking at affective states, participants often cited affective states, freedom from pain, stress, suffering, loneliness. They talked about positive welfare or the happiness of the animal as mattering. I can tell you right now that the biggest push, I think, in the field of study that I work in, applied animal behavior science, the biggest area is understanding positive affective states in animals. Temple mentioned the emotional valence arguments and the impacts of how people are starting to study that. That is happening around the world. The last meeting of my scientific society last year had a full-day workshop on new techniques that are being developed to assess positive emotional states in animals. Okay? That's a big deal. They're looking for indicators. A lot of it's coming out of Europe, but there's an awful lot of people working on that area. Canadian consumer attitudes, freedom from pain was further emphasized. Again, appropriate pain management. Now, when you talk to beef producers, you have consumers saying pain matters. Okay? Spooner did another study. He actually interviewed or surveyed beef producers, dairy producers, and swine producers, I believe. And what he found when he talked to beef producers was that beef producers realized that things like branding and castration were painful, but they were acceptable because they were necessary for regulatory or management reasons. There was a trade-off to prevent worse welfare from things such as aggression, or the pain was such short-term, it was relatively unimportant. Okay? So this really creates a problem when it comes to thinking about social licensing. Right? So social licensing, the opportunity, the privilege of operating with minimal formalized restrictions based on maintaining public trust by doing what's right. Okay? And the public trust, the belief that activities are consistent with social expectations and the values of the community and other stakeholders. So, you're a beef producer and you have the public saying, pain matters, we need to do something about it, I'm worried about the pain animals are feeling, and you have beef producers saying, well, yeah, but it's acceptable. Okay? You've got a problem developing, you can sense a tension developing between what the producers are thinking and what the public or consumers are thinking. You can imagine that when that happens, you're putting the social license, producers are putting the social license at risk. The social license goes to risk, we move from voluntary codes or standards to more and more regulation, more and more laws being eventually introduced. Long way to go from point A to point B, and there's steps along the way, but there's no question you end up with more of a regulatory type framework. This is work from Charlie Arnott's lab talking about what happens when you lose that social license to operate. Again, when we have the social license, you have a flexible, lower cost, you're flexible, and when you lose it, you move to a more rigid, bureaucratic type system. Social license versus social control. One of the important aspects of maintaining trust, maintaining a social license, is the values that you have or you share. Okay? So when producers are saying, yeah, pain's okay, we know it hurts, but it's all right not to worry about it, and you have consumers saying, that doesn't sound like you share my values at all. Right? That's where the trust in how food is produced starts waning, and the public starts saying, well, maybe these industries need more regulations, or we need to be looking after them better because they're not looking after themselves well enough. Okay? We do know that the European Commission has just finished the Eurobarometer survey in 2015. The results are not surprising at all. The amount of people who care about animal welfare when it comes to food production has increased. That study was just released, I think, beginning of this year, 2016. The results were put forward. It shows an increase in concern about animal welfare and food production. Do they think food could be better produced, welfare could be better looked after in their own countries? The majority, overwhelming majority, 80%, 90% say yes. If you're a member of the European Parliament or member of the EU and you're looking for direction as to what I should be working on in the future, when somebody says we can do better, you get 90% of the people saying we can do better for animal welfare, that gets on your radar screen, right? And they are right now putting together a new strategy on animal welfare and food production. So, understanding the attitudes of people, consumers, etc. is a really important component of recognizing that this issue of animal welfare isn't going away anytime soon. I think one of the good things that's happening in terms of future drivers is the fact that more and more agricultural economists are getting interested in the issue of animal welfare. Historically, ag economists have focused on costs associated with changes in management. They've looked at the conflict between preferences and willingness to pay. What that means is when you ask people, will you pay more for animal welfare-friendly products, they say yes. And then they go to the store and they buy whatever's on sale. Right? It's a real phenomenon. It's a real issue. It seems inconsistent, right? But it's the difference between acting as a citizen and acting as a consumer. When you ask the question to somebody, are you in favor of this? They say yes. It represents a value that they have. Okay? The willingness to pay issue becomes a real problem. But when they go and act as a consumer, they have other things they're trading off. So you're not asking them to do the same thing at the same time, and people can act in both ways. Okay? They've also worked on models relating animal welfare and livestock production. For example, this is just a theoretical model. Don't worry, there's no tests in this class. But this is just a theoretical model demonstrating what the relationship is between animal welfare, productivity, where social values come in. The point here is that people are starting to model in much more detail this trade-off between productivity, welfare, and societal expectations. They're also working on things such as this model. This is a model that's looking at the relationship between animal welfare, egg production, profitability for a producer constrained by barn space. So this is Lusk and Norwood in doing a paper in applied economic perspective policy, blah, 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 whatever it is. So the point here again is people are thinking about this trade-off between animal welfare, animal productivity, trying to come up with specific recommendations based on economics. So in terms of the animal welfare and economics, there's a lot more things that need to be done. They haven't really been involved for the most part, but it's starting. And I think it's important because we all know that the economics arguments are very important arguments for producers. They're working on more work to understand that willingness to pay issue. They're investigating things like incentive frameworks to encourage animal welfare. Historically, what the model that has been put forward is a model of subsidizing the producer. What does that mean? That means if you want me to produce something using a new type of housing system, a new type of X, Y, or Z to improve animal welfare, please compensate me for adapting to this new system, is the attempt that has often been made. Some economists are saying that that's a completely failed model, and what we really need to be doing is subsidizing consumers. What that means is subsidizing the product that's produced in an animal welfare friendly way so that it's cheap in the marketplace, therefore people will buy it, therefore that'll create a larger market. Right? So it's a very different way of thinking about the whole incentive frameworks and how they work. Take-home message is that animal welfare isn't really outside the discussion of the cost of production any longer. And ag economists, a number of them leaders here in the US, are very much getting involved with the whole issue. And this is a book again by Luskin Norwood, I believe, who wrote a book on animal welfare from an ag economist perspective. Animal welfare is part of the arguments that are happening. We know, for example, we have global conferences, global trade in animal welfare, right? We have things such as the International Finance Corporation with their book, Creating Business Opportunities Through Improved Animal Welfare. You know who the International Finance Corporation is? It's the World Bank. Okay? Why in the world is the World Bank interested in animal welfare? They're a bank. Right? Well, the reason is if you're a country that comes to the World Bank and they say, I'm very interested in, I want to develop a new industry within my country, I need some financing to make that happen. The World Bank says, okay, fine, you have a good plan in place. What's your animal welfare strategy and protocols that you're going to be using? Why do they want to know that? Well, the World Bank is like every bank that loans you money, right? They want to get paid back. And if they want to get paid back, they want to make sure you have as much access to international marketplaces as you can have. And they know, for example, if you want to get access to the EU or organizations, countries with high animal welfare standards, your animal welfare standards, you have to have animal welfare standards in order to play in that marketplace. Right? I was at a feedlot operator's location and we were talking, he called me in, he said, I want to talk about animal welfare standards. And I said, what brought this on? And he said, well, I had a guy in here the other day, he was buying frozen carcasses from me to ship to China. And we were talking about it, and then he asked me, so what's your animal welfare program? My animal welfare program? You're buying carcasses going to China. Why do you care what my animal welfare program is? Right? And he said, well, you know, the intention is to get them to China, but if, for example, we get them on the boat and we're moving them and there's an opportunity that happens and the market opens up in Europe for some reason where I can sell them for more, that's where I want to send them. How much flexibility am I getting with this product when I buy this product from you? Canadian government has some things on socially conscious consumer trends. This is back in 2011. Nice little document, summarizes a bunch of things. And I don't know how you feel about it, but when the government is actually publishing stuff on animal welfare, it's way past being at the top of the chart, right? It's somewhere else when the government's involved already. The government's catching up to where industries have already gone. We have the ban on fur seal trade in the EU. It's a big deal for animal activists. What happened is that the EU banned fur seal coming into the EU from Canada and from Norway. And that's a problem under the GATT agreements and under the World Trade Organization rules and laws, which says you can't discriminate against like products of domestic origin. Basically what that means is that a pork chop produced in country A is the same as a pork chop produced in country B, C, or D. GATT rules are about liberalized trade. The way a product is produced can't be seen or can't be used as a trade barrier. If you do that, all you're really doing is encouraging and supporting large industrial advanced countries where developing countries with less technology can't play in the marketplace because they aren't using the appropriate level of technology. So you're trying to trade things which are of similar types. So fur seal from any country should be fine because it's all seal fur. The WTO said that, so the EU said, well, that's fine, but what we're really doing is using this other article called Article 20, necessary to protect public morals. Basically, they said, if we are going to ban it in Europe because the public is so outraged by how this product is produced, it's a threat to the morality of the European Union. The WTO found that argument to be fair. They basically said that that's fine, we can use it and you can ban it on those grounds. That was one of the largest victories animal activist groups around the world had ever heard. Because that opened up the possibility that you could use animal welfare standards as a trade barrier if you didn't like the way a certain thing is being produced. Okay? I think the implications for ag are huge. Now, do I really expect there to be a whole bunch of negotiations and lawsuits up at the world trade level? No, the point of the story is that if this is happening at the world trade level, right, where World Trade Organization is involved and it takes 7-10 years for this type of thing to come to settlement, a lot of this is happening at much lower levels, between country agreements, company agreements, that type of thing. So there's a lot of discussion around how that's being produced. We have the issues of standards and assessments being developed. We have new codes of practice in Canada. We have OIE Global Conference on Animal Welfare. There's another OIE conference coming up in Mexico in December. OIE is the Organization for Animal Health. It's made up of the world's leading veterinarians. So every country has a representative to the OIE. So it's whoever the US veterinarian is or the Canadian veterinarian is. They've created international standards for animal welfare, for production of animals, use of animals in lots of different areas. They are the standard-setting organization for the WTO. The standards are fairly minimal, as you might expect if you have 172 countries that are trying to get together to set standards. However, they do have regional plans, and the reality is there are standards in place. We have a new program in place in Canada for feedlot operators called Canadian Feedlot Animal Care Assessment Program. It's certified by PACO, which is the Professional Animal Auditing Certification Organization based here in the United States. What that means is that that's an on-farm, on-feedlot animal welfare assessment that's done. Okay? That means people are coming out to the feedlots, going through their checklist and checking off what it is you're doing, what it is you're not doing. Same thing is happening in the dairy industry through a program called ProAction. On-farm, on-dairy farm, live assessments where you're being assessed to see whether or not you are meeting this animal welfare standard. In the feedlot area, it's still getting started, so it's kind of gathering information. In the dairy area, these on-farm assessments have been around for a while, and there are actually penalties being put in place by the dairy industry if you fail to meet that standard. This is just an outline of some of the issues that are under the Canadian Feedlot Animal Welfare Assessment Program. So standards are in place. Standards are great to have, but how do you get producers to actually adopt them? Right? You can have all kinds of programs on minimizing disease, biosecurity programs, animal care welfare programs, but the real challenge is how do you get that information out to producers? Education and outreach, huge component in terms of what's going forward. Think about this conference. It's a conference all about animal welfare, a whole day on animal welfare in Michigan. Fantastic, right? Lots of people interested in the whole animal welfare issue. Every commodity organization now, when you go to a conference, many of them will have an animal welfare section in it. Never used to be the case. When it comes to education, though, agriculture industry or people think that the one thing that's really important is to educate the public. The argument I often hear is, if they just understood what it is we do and why we do it, they would appreciate what it is we do and why we do it, and we wouldn't have these problems. I'm not so sure. I'm not sure that no matter what anybody says about blunt force trauma for baby piglets, picking them up, smashing their heads on the concrete floor, just because the AVMA says it's a fine way to do it, I'm not sure I can convince a room full of soccer moms that that's okay. Right? And my room full of soccer moms are also my consumers. Right? So sometimes we have to recognize that some things are just not acceptable, even if the science says it might be acceptable, or you're going to have that response. The good news is that there are efforts by producers to reach out more. Social media has made that really popular, or possible, I should say. So there are a lot more outreaches by producers telling the story about what it is they do and why they do it. Another element of the education and outreach factors is that the evidence from studies done at places like Purdue Ag Econ Department and other land-grant universities suggests that consumers want to know more about their food more than ever. Right? Millennials are somehow different than the generations that came before them. The issue of how food is produced, where their food comes from, slow food, local food, that's a real phenomenon that's people. But what about the producer? Okay? Education and outreach has to address the producer's concerns as well. I think they're often overlooked, right, in terms of some of these efforts. And it's not that people don't try, it's that there can be always some difficult to reach producers. Producers who don't come to meetings, producers who just basically go about their business. They're not necessarily looking at adopting new methodologies. Very few, I think one of the good things that's happening is that people are starting to address the question, how is it that producers actually learn? Okay? What is an effective way of reaching and outreaching to producers? This is just one model that people are using. This is from a paper in Livestock Science, and it actually is titled Understanding Farmers' Decisions with Regard to Animal Welfare, the Case of Changing to Group Housing for Pregnant Sows. So it's something that's called the theory of planned behavior, and there's a number of steps that it goes through. It's not important that you know what the steps are or anything like that. The point here is that people are looking at how to implement change, or how producers understand things in order to implement change. It's another model done in the Netherlands and published in 2011, looking at different categories of hard-to-reach dairy farmers. What makes them hard to reach? Why aren't they implementing Yoni's programs and things like that? Understanding their approach to learning is really fundamental. So you have the proactivists who have a lot of contact with colleagues across the whole country. I get a lot of information from them. And then the category I like is the reclusive traditionalists. I don't like it when other people are looking into my farm business. I'm very much on my own. Thank you very much. Right? How do you ever get those people to adopt new technologies, new approaches, new programs, and especially things like animal welfare, animal care standards? My goodness gracious, it's not going to make me any money. It's just going to make me work. But the fact that they're being identified, this type of thing can be done for different types of programs. And what it does is that it gives us information for extension and outreach activities. That says, okay, for this issue, the majority of our producers are in this category. In order to reach this category, we need to develop outreach programs to address and be the most effective way possible. Sounds good. At the end of the day, we end up having to do everything. All kinds of different approaches work for different individuals. But it is really important step, I think, in terms of understanding how that outreach might possibly work. Without it, we do what we've always been doing. We create the material, we do the research, we create the outreach material, and somehow it's supposed to magically get from A to B and adopted. Right? So how good does things like reaching out and sending people material work? Well, the new Dairy Code of Practice, it's not new any longer, but the Code of Practice was sent by, in Canada, it's a supply managed system. So dairy farmers of Canada control how much milk everybody produces, et cetera. They know who all the producers are. They know how much milk they're producing. Everybody in the country that's a dairy farmer was sent a copy of the Code of Practice. Okay? When we asked them a couple of years afterwards whether or not they've ever heard of the Dairy Code of Practice, 69% said, yeah, they thought they heard something about the Code of Practice, even though every producer got a copy and the Dairy Farmers of Canada had invested millions of dollars in promoting it. Then when they were asked, have you ever read the Code of Practice, 40% of them said yes. Right? So the new recommendations, requirements for the care and handling of animals read by 40%. We went to some of the farms and they were very proud to tell us, yeah, we have it right here on our shelf. They pull it off the shelf and it was still in the plastic that was mailed out to them. But they knew where it was on their shelf. I think another big issue or a fundamental aspect of future drivers for animal welfare is science. And science advances and technological innovations have and will continue to be a driver for animal welfare. Okay? It's very positive that animal welfare has expanded from a small group of scientists, primarily coming from psychology backgrounds, to include a much larger range of scientists now. You have people that are doing genetics, people that are doing molecular biology, all kinds of people and scientists are looking at animal welfare. And I'm really happy to say that veterinarians themselves are much more involved in aspects of animal welfare outside of just animal health. Okay? So they're much more involved with thinking about mental states of animals and other things and not just disease and health type issues. There are general principles that have been developed for animal welfare. I think one of the dangers, veterinarians are much more involved in animal welfare, but one of the real dangers is that veterinarians define animal welfare as health-only related issues. Right? And animal welfare includes health, but it also includes the mental well-being of animals, which is another complete issue. This is a paper that was published in the Vet Journal in 2013 outlining general principles for the welfare of animals in production systems. The science and its applications. I think it's basically saying, look, we have some basic guidance for the development of these standards. They deal with things like genetics, the environment, social behavior, feed, water, air quality, disease and parasites, handling, knowledge and skill of the producers and handlers of animals, as well as pain management, where if you can't avoid painful procedures, how do you mitigate the pain? Let's just outline kind of the general principles. We have new technologies. Infrared thermography being used at Hans Kutze, Iowa State University, was using it to look at castration issues. Strain gauges and pressure transducers on the squeeze chute to see animals pushing and fighting out during a particular procedure. Heart rate monitors on cattle. People are using play behavior, for example, to look at the impact of NSAIDs and looking at the amount of playing that this calf did when she was on an NSAID or not. You see that the pain control resulted in similar levels of bucking and playing afterwards as an animal that received nothing. We can look at brain waves of animals. So the top few lines there show a difference between pre-castration and post-castration and the change that occurs in brain waves. We have algometers that we can look at pressure and sensors to see how painful when the animal starts to respond to pain. The bottom picture on the left is basically to remind you that we really at this moment don't have very many good biomarkers of pain for farm animals. But there's a huge push in human medicine to develop biomarkers for pain and at the molecular level try to identify those things that might work. I think the real change that's going to be happening, though, in the future is that the emphasis is going to be on the emotional states of animals. Again, people are worried about pain, they're worried about suffering, a lot of work being done on emotional valence, biomarkers of pain, and again, reflecting society's concern about natural behaviors. Genetics, genomics is another big area, for example, the development of cattle that we can go in now through gene editing, create dairy cattle that are polled, don't have horns, so they don't need to go through the whole dehorning process. That's something that's happened. The biggest issue there is whether or not it's acceptable to consumers or whether there's a genetically modified organism or not. The people who are proponents of gene editing will argue that it is not, because you're not really modifying anything. You're not putting in anything new. You're just increasing selection that would happen normally. We have the pain issues. Things like grimace scales have been developed now. So grimace scales for mice have been around for a long time in lab animals. It's still kind of being validated and developed. These are indicators of pain. Different eye positions, body position, especially around the face. They've been developed for mice. They've been developed for horses. They've been developed now for sheep. And there's a new one that's just coming out for cattle as well. Other people are looking at indicators of depression in horses, for example. This is a paper done out of France as well as the University of Guelph, published in 2015. Trying again, looking for indicators of poor welfare states. And we already talked about the infrared thermography and how that could potentially be used as an indicator of stress. We have done studies looking at early detection of illness through things like feeding behavior. So these are situations where individual cow feed intake is actually being measured on a daily basis. And by looking at those indicators, looking at how much they're actually feeding, you actually pick up on an animal that's getting sick 2 to 3 days prior to any clinical signs that the animal is getting sick. So that's been done in a number of different places, a number of different studies. New technology is great. We've just, this is Melissa Moggy's master's thesis. She just defended it a week ago. I co-supervised her master's thesis with Claire Windier. And new technologies are fine, but sometimes we can learn a lot just by asking people what they're doing and how they're doing it. We asked this question about cattle pain and stress on cow-calf operations. We wanted to understand what they were doing and what the barriers were to them actually doing it. Why is it? What do they feel about pain mitigation? What do they feel about animal welfare types of things? I just share one piece of data with you, and that's perceptions of pain. So calving management and calf processing practices are painful if no pain mitigation is given. We asked 112 different producers, I think, or 92 here, that whether or not they thought any of these activities were painful to the calf if nothing was given to the calf and or the cow. And it's really interesting because the majority, overwhelming majority, strongly agreed or somewhat agreed that these practices, dehorning, castration, dystocia, branding, etc., are painful to a calf or a cow if pain mitigation isn't done. Which is wonderful because it puts a hole in the entire argument that producers don't think these things cause pain. They do think these things cause pain. They know these things cause pain, and that pain mitigation would be a good thing, which means they're much more likely to do it if they can give them the right tools. We're also doing a project looking at pain associated with dystocia and its impact on calf survivability. So we're doing things like giving cows and calves meloxicam to look at whether or not it has any impact on the calf health issues. So this is work being done by Jennifer Pearson, who came to us from Cornell. And we're also doing a study right now in terms of beef cattle, looking at the cow-calf bond and how pain might be having an impact on that. So, do you think animals experience pain during calving? Or farrowing? Or giving birth? Probably. Do we do anything to manage that? Nothing. Does it have any impact on the quality of the bond that could occur between the cow and the calf? If the calf has been pulled, if the cow has been in a long labor, it's highly likely that they're going to be getting up and acting as quickly as possible. So maybe we can do things to manage the pain around that. So we're looking at the whole issue of, first of all, understanding what happens in terms of calves being pulled and understanding the rates of mismothering and cross-fostering. We're looking at pain management, but we're also looking at oxytocin as a potential way to create a bond or improve the bond between cows and calves, especially for things like cross-fostering, where you need to get a cow and calf to accept one another. We don't know if it'll work. There's a lot of issues to be done, but it's something that we're pretty excited about, and I have a new PhD student that just started this fall. So all this stuff about science and all that and how important it is it really that important? Does it really have an impact on social license? I don't know. I'm skeptical. Temple answered the question about cages and layers and that type of thing. And so I won't stay on the topic very long. when that comparison was done by the sustainability group here at Michigan State, as well as the scientific review done in Canada, basically the story came out that enriched cages are so much better than a lot of aviaries that exist right now. And the story is, as Temple said, what happened in terms of corporate moves. Corporate moves, retailers basically said, that doesn't matter. What we're interested in is what the consumers want, and they don't seem to like cages, so we're moving to non-cage systems. Even though a lot of the data suggests that welfare's not as good in those systems. What happens is that it simply creates technical challenges for us, right? We need to figure out a way to make aviaries better, and Temple gave the example of the enriched cage being put in an aviary system, making maybe birds better through genetic selection, that type of thing. The other issue that's occurring is the issue of sustainability. People often say, what does that mean? I don't want to open up that discussion, but there is an awful lot of efforts that are happening in terms of thinking about sustainable agriculture, and animal welfare is part of that whole discussion. It's not clear how big of a role it's going to play, but it has been identified as something that needs to be part of that discussion. So, animal welfare is in all aspects of animal agriculture. We have new technology. I think the drivers of change are simply going to increase. I don't think animal welfare is going away. Concern about how animals are being raised and treated is increasing. Activities by researchers is increasing across a broad spectrum, from engineering all the way to biology and philosophy and psychology. And I think that those influences are going to change, and I think sustainability is going to become still part of a whole global discussion that's occurring through organizations like the Sustainability Consortium and other programs involving huge multinational companies that are looking at sustainable ag. With that, I'll take any questions you may have. Thank you very much. First of all, is it going to be a hard question, Temple?
Hello? Okay, maybe it's working out. It's either going to be a hard question or an easy question. You probably wonder why I was fiddling with my phone, which I normally don't do. But I was trying to look up the Canadian feedlot assessment program, and I cannot find it. I got into a zillion press releases. I typed in the exact title. I wrote it down, the Canadian Feedlot Animal Care Assessment Program. I wrote that all. I cannot get into it on this phone that doesn't have any privileged access. I got into all these press releases.
Yeah.
I went to the cattle feeder site. I can't get the guideline up on my phone.
Really?
And I am a very, very big proponent of free access to guidelines. When we did our American Meat Institute guidelines originally, I put them up on my webpage. You want to get a guideline used, you've got to make it accessible, and I could not get into it, and you probably saw me playing with the phone. I'm not in any way attacking you. Great talk, but they need to get their webpage fixed.
No, I'm telling you what I'm going to do, Temple. I have a better solution. I'm going to get that link, and I'm going to send it to your website.
I don't want a link. I want it so when I can just Google it, I can find it.
Yeah.
That's called web access.
I'm surprised cattle feeders don't have it. That's surprising.
You can send it to me.
I'll send it.
Okay, you send it to me? Yep.
I'll send it to you.
All right, why don't you do that? But the thing is, they need to fix that so people can Google that easily.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had trouble finding it myself, and it's strange that it's that difficult.
Oh, well, it doesn't come up. I mean, I went through, went 3 or 4 pages in on my phone. I clicked on their webpage. I clicked on a whole bunch of stuff. I know it's rude during the talk to play with the phone, but that's what I was doing on it.
Other questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me? No.
It's Ed, but that's okay.
Okay, Frank. Okay, my question is, and this is based on the farm program. When I look at the farm program, which for those of you who don't know, it's a dairy audit, what I see is that we have a lot of boxes that we check, that we make consumers happy, but we don't necessarily improve the welfare of the cattle on the farm. Is the Canadian program different, and what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I don't know the farm program well enough to comment on whether what it's made up of that way or not. And other people are here who know a lot more about it than I do. There is it all has to do with the balance. It's what Temple said earlier about having paper-heavy audits versus not. So there's a huge balance between making sure people are keeping good records versus actually looking at animal indicators. So I have a lot of criticism for a lot of programs that are out there that put a huge emphasis on input measures as well as management measures, but ignore animal output measures. So for example, you may have put in the best flora you possibly can. Everybody may have told you that this flora will cause no slipping, everything will be fine. That's an input measure, floor design. Then you bring your animals in on the floor and everybody slips and falls. Right? That's the animal output. The emphasis on, oh, that's a nice new flooring, scoring high, versus the animals falling is the wrong emphasis. The problem is that for input or engineering type measures, they're easy to do. You can go in and measure the size of a stall or the type of floor they have, or whether or not gates are broken or not broken, and we tick some boxes. What we really need to do is get away from that and say, do the animals have injuries? Are the animals thin? Are the animals lame? Are the animals heavy? Put an emphasis on the animal aspect rather than on paper keeping, record keeping, and the input parts of it all. The one thing that producers will always fail is record keeping. To have an audit, I was once asked to approve of an audit or to give my blessing on an audit that the person never had to go in the barn and look at an animal at all. All you had to do was go through the records a farmer had. First of all, doesn't fly in terms of animal welfare. Second of all, if producers don't do a good job on something, it's record keeping. And yes, record keeping is important, but why set up audits for people to fail rather when they're looking after the animals doing a great job with them? So emphasis on the animal indicator instead.
I'm not using the phone to look up something on the web. So, Ed, do you think we're making decisions in the food system based on informed consumers or misinformed consumers? And can you give an example?
I think what's really happening is I don't think consumers are that informed, but I don't think consumers are what's driving it. I think we're allowing retailers to dictate agricultural policy, right? So I think it comes down to what retailers believe their consumers want.
Will buy. So it's marketing.
Buy. So it is it's a bit of marketing.
So does it make sense to make some of the decisions we've made in the vein of real animal welfare?
Well, I would say that, as we talked about earlier today with the issues around switching to non-cage systems completely, indicates that it's not in the best interest, at least in the short term, for animal welfare. And those things happen. And if we, it's the trade-off belonging in a free marketplace where we allow retailers to have that kind of emphasis and pressure to be able to say, we'll buy your product if you raise it this way, we won't if you don't raise it that way. And I don't know who's in power to help make those types of changes not happen, whether it's consumers need to become more informed, or I'm not exactly sure where that answer is.
Okay.
Thoughts?
I'd agree it's marketing. One of the things in Michigan, we've been doing breakfast on the farm since 2009, and one of the questions we ask is, what's your impression about dairy housing before your tour, and what's your impression about dairy housing after the tour? And this is a post-tour question.
Yeah.
And about half, the first sample we did, we had about 30-some people were very negative about dairy housing before the tour. Half of them left with a very positive response. In other words, they want 5, they want the full scale. And the rest of them moved over except for 1 or 2 that were sold on, dairy housing's bad. Yeah. We know we can change, if in some cases we know once the consumer sees how things are actually being done, they get it.
Yep.
So they're in a hot breakfast line, they walk into a cool dairy barn, and they understand why the cow's being housed in that manner. They also see that they're not tethered to a milking machine all day long, which they've read, or that they're in filthy conditions, which they've read. So
Yeah. No,
that's
I think
part of our challenge, I think. Is
yeah, it is. It's a huge part of the challenge in terms of getting consumer acceptance. I think one of the other elements of the whole, not so much the tours, but the assessments. Talking to producers, and this was from my involvement with the Pork Board here in the U.S., and talking to producers who went through the animal welfare assessments, the SWAP program, and all that type of stuff, they found it a very positive experience as well at the end of it all. I identified management issues that they kind of were floating under the radar for them. And so, yeah, educating consumers is an important component of it. But it's also important to look internally as well and have some self-testing and
well, there are some
self-criticism.
things I think we can fix,
Yeah.
the low-hanging fruit,
Yeah.
and there's some things we need to give up
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah.
But there are some things that I'm concerned that we're going to give up that we shouldn't give up.
fair enough. Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody.